excited for tomorrow. What about you? I mean, you look kind of strangely nervous. Huh? Relax. We're just going to the Louvre tomorrow. It's gonna be amazing. And I think you're gonna love it. Huh? It'd help if I talked you to sleep. Sure, yeah. About what? I could just talk about some of the stuff we'll see tomorrow. Yeah, does that sound good? Hopefully, I hope you get some sleep. Because I think if you listen to the entire thing, you'll probably be bored to death. Which would be unfortunate. Alright, so the Louvre. It wasn't originally a museum. It was a fortress built by a Philip of some number. I think it was either first or second. And Louis the 14th made it his kind of personal collection gallery thing. Until the National Assembly decided it would become a museum during the French Revolution. So, right out in the front of the Louvre, there's a statue of Louis the 14th, the Sun King. I bet he was a pretty bright guy. He was a king who tried to consolidate Actually, I don't really want to get into a history lesson, sorry. It's an equestrian statue. So our Shining Louis is astride a horse. I guess monarchs just like being on horses and statues because it makes them taller and some such. But you know, horses look nice, so there's that for us. You don't use the original entrance into the Louvre anymore. I think it was in the 90s that the architect I.M. Pei created the famous glass pyramid that is now used as the entrance. It's just kind of in between the opening wings of the Louvre. Is that what you call them? It looks really, really nice at night. I suppose that was probably one of the goals of it being a glass pyramid. So you go in through that, and then you go down, and then you're in the Louvre. I don't really know how we're gonna go through the Louvre, the order of anything really. I do know that one of the first things you come across if you kind of go through like the standard entrance, basically the first thing you'll see is Winged Victory of Samothrace. It's a Greek statue of Nike. It doesn't actually sit on starboard. Bow? Is that it? Is that the front of a ship? It doesn't actually sit on like the bow of a ship, but it kind of looks like it's supposed to. It would have actually sat in like an actual building. It doesn't actually sit. It's a standing statue. It's really big. And it was made to commemorate the victory of a sea battle, I believe, which is why it looks like it's on a ship. But yeah, it's really cool. It's got outstretched wings. I don't think it has a head. It's more detailed on one side than the other because I think it was only supposed to be viewed from one side. I don't know which is which, but I guess we'll see when we get there. But it's like an original Greek thing, which is super rare, kind of like Venus de Milo, which is also there. They both share having super elegant drapery, although I believe the Venus de Milo is far more famous. It's like the centerpiece of, like, do you know any Greek sculptures? The Venus de Milo has no arms. I assume the sculptor had arms at some point. They probably fell off. And I think a lot of people thought originally that it was sculpted by Praxiteles, but it's someone else now. I have no idea. I don't remember the person's name. But like those two are original Greek marble statues. I think those are the two really, really famous ones. There's also, I believe, a Roman copy of Apollo, Sarek Taunus, which the original was actually created by Praxiteles this time. Sarek Taunus just means lizard slayer. A lot of Greek gods will have epithets, is that the word? Like appended to their names, kind of talking about something they did or watched over. And Sarek Taunus refers to Apollo's role slaying the python at Delphi so that a temple could be placed and the oracle of Delphi could have a home and proceed to ruin a bunch of people's lives with prophecies that made them do things they wouldn't have done before. I'm looking at you, Oedipus. But it's kind of funny because the sculpture is just Apollo and this little lizard on a tree trunk branch. I assume the sculptor just didn't want to make a full-sized python, so it's easier just to have him slaying a tiny little lizard. And the Greek stuff definitely isn't even like the oldest stuff. There's a lot of Egyptian stuff. I know there's some like smaller mini-sized sphinxes, the original like famous sphinxes in Egypt. So then there are some wall painting fresco things. They look really nice even if the paint's a bit faded. And hieroglyphics. It's kind of amazing to think about something like that enduring several thousand years of wear and tear and now being like decipherable to us. And that's not even their oldest stuff. They have stuff from Babylonian times, Assyrian, and Akkadian, I think. They have I'm not sure if there are multiple copies, but they have a Code of Hammurabi, where the top half is this image of Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the Babylonian sun god. And I guess that was the way of him justifying like the law, like, look, I got it from a god, you guys should all listen. And the bottom half is like the writing of the rules. It's very lex talionis, very eye for an eye, that sort of retributive punishment thing. And then they have a victory cell of Naram Sin. It just got all these like small little guys walking up to Naram Sin, and he's like humongous. And I guess that's sort of the same thing as the riding a horse thing, where he's like bigger, so he's like more powerful. He's the rightful ruler, I guess. I think they have some Lamasu. I don't know how to pronounce it. But basically they're winged bulls with the heads of man and these epic beards. And one of the interesting things is I think most of these are made as reliefs. So what it is it's not like an actual sculpture, like you have like a flat piece of stone and it kind of pops out towards you, so it's not full freestanding, but it's not like flat really. And the Lamasu are all made with 5 legs, even though they like only have 4, because when viewed from the side you can see all 4 legs, but also if you view it from the front you can see like the 2 legs, like 2 front legs. So they're made with 5 legs. Just thought that was small little interesting thing. I don't know if you care. And there are lots of old artifacts, so many old artifacts. It's amazing what's survived so long. But yeah, I'm excited to see them once we get off this train. And of course, Louvre has the Mona Lisa. I'm 95% sure it's the most famous painting in the world, by Da Vinci. There's not much to say about it, or at least not much on my part. I don't know too much. Other than I think it's a very good example of, I think it's called Sfumato. This kind of shadowy, hazing look that just, it works. It makes it look more real and stuff. Da Vinci has some other paintings. In the museum, there's Madonna of the Rocks, one of the two copies. The reason there are two copies is actually kind of funny. So he was commissioned to do the piece, and while he had finished it, but before he delivered it, some other rich person came along, saw it, and offered to buy it for more than the commission, so Leonardo did that, and he had to make a second copy for the original patron. I'm not sure where the other one is. Probably Italy. A lot of Italian stuff ends up in Italy. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but yeah. It's also a very good example of Chiaroscuro, the play between light and dark, which I think is also shown in, I think there's a John the Baptist by him. It's very effeminate looking. That's honestly the only real thing I remember from when I studied it. Right across from the Mona Lisa, though, is this enormous painting by Veronese, The Wedding at Cana, and where Da Vinci comes so close to making things look kind of real, if a bit dramatic. The painting is really, really bright. It's made in this style called Mannerism, which was kind of weird and strangely elegant. When you think elegant, you think long neck maybe, and there's actually a painting in the Manneristic style that is literally just called Madonna of the Long Neck, and Madonna just has a long neck in it. Anyways, the wedding at Cana is of Jesus' first miracle of turning water into wine. Yay, wine! And aside from not being super photorealistic, the painting is also historically inaccurate, as it contains tons of historical figures that had no right living in Jesus' time, like Suleiman the Magnificent. Like, that doesn't make any sense, does it? There are some other Italian masters in the Louvre. There's Cimabue and Giotto. They're from before the Renaissance, and it's really interesting looking at their works because you can see the difference in an understanding of perspective between what they create and what almost anything that's really considered Renaissance does. Actually, I think it's usually considered proto-Renaissance, so like before the Renaissance. I know they're both famous for versions of the Maesta, which is the glory of the Virgin Mary enthroned with baby Jesus. And one of the really cool things about their work is that they used actual, like a layer of gold leaf for the backgrounds usually. Giotto actually has a very nice looking chapel, but I think that's in Italy, unfortunately. For us, I mean, I guess it's fortunate for the Italians and people visiting Italy. It's actually kind of funny. Inside that chapel, there's an image of the patrons presenting the chapel to an angel, sort of as an offering of forgiveness for the past sins of their ancestors, which was charging interest on loans. Who else is there? There are some Caravaggios, I believe, and where Chiaroscuro is the play of light and dark, Caravaggio is kind of the master of something called tenebrism, which is like a fight between light and dark. It's extremes between them, and it really highlights just like the difference between the two. I mean, I know it's not there, I think, but the Calling of St. Matthew is an excellent example of what Caravaggio liked to do with light and darkness. There's also some stuff by Botticelli. You might know him better for The Birth of Venus and La Primavera, which are both in Italy, but he has some works that are in the Louvre, and I assume they'd look quite excellent. Botticelli is quite a good painter. Of course, it being France and this being the Louvre, it would be remiss not to talk about the famous French painters that are housed there. The French painters aren't housed there, their works are. Oh god, I'm tired. Hope you're starting to drift off too. So, for whatever reason, the Louvre has decided to have the cover of Viva la Vida by Coldplay as a huge painting there. I'm just kidding. The painting is Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix. It's not actually of the French Revolution, like the French Revolution that beheaded Louis XVI and had the Reign of Terror and all. It was actually from a later revolution, I think 1824. I'm not exactly sure of the year, but it's got this one of her breasts, this bare lady leading a bunch of people, and there's boys, and it's kind of like a common cause. It's a rallying cry of the revolution. And the lady, she represents liberty. That's why it's called Liberty Leading the People. It also has the Death of Sardanapalus. It's this painting of Sardanapalus who knows he's about to lose the city, and so he orders the death of everyone around him, his horses. He has a bunch of maidens around, and it's kind of like this tragic, emotional scene. Yeah, the painting is very romantic. The art, romantic, sort of emotional, that sort of stuff, not the romance, because that wouldn't make any sense. That scene is not very romantic at all. What else does he have? He has kind of this despairing massacre at Chios painting, which just shows in the foreground there are some Ottomans, and they've just or are in the act of committing a massacre, and these lamenting women in the background. There's sickness and death and destruction. It's not a particularly nice scene, but it is very romantic in a sort of gray, despairing art period sort of manner. There's also the bark of Dante. No, Dante was not a dog. It's like a ship. Bark, spelled B-A-R-Q-U-E, I think. And the scene is from Dantes Inferno. And it just shows Dante and Virgil on this boat, and there are a bunch of poor, hapless souls in hell trying to just hang on. Speaking of Dante, I'm not sure how many works there are by Rodin actually in the Louvre, but there are certain to be some in Paris, like, you know, The Thinker and everything, and I think most of his famous works were meant to be kind of part of this huge thing called The Gates of Hell, which was also all inspired by Dante's Inferno, and just that felt like something to say. I don't know. There's what other French painters are there? Géricault. He's really famous for this painting called The Raft of the Medusa, and it's this painting inspired by a real-life shipwreck, and its survivors, and Géricault actually went to talk to them and procured some, I think, actual dead bodies in order to make his painting more realistic. It's interesting. There are kind of two classical triangles in the painting. One is of death and lament and mourning, and the other is hope and life, and there's this guy waving his red shirt to signal a ship that will come and rescue them. I really like the painting. In case you can't tell, And it's sort of this hallmark of the Romantic era, at least in France. And he's got these portraits of people that he met at an insane asylum, and I've only gotten to really look at one or two, but they're really interesting. They're really emotional, and the way he draws the faces it's really powerful. Yeah, those are the two really famous French romantics. Then there's the painter of Napoleon and the French Revolution, Jacques-Louis David, and his style he's actually before them. It's neoclassical, and what it is it's kind of an attempt to bring back and go back to a Renaissance style and evoke a lot of classical Greek and Roman elements. So there's like the Oath of the Horatii. I don't know. It's a work of a classical story of three brothers swearing to fight in this battle, and the lighting and how the people are positioned, and there are even Roman columns in the background. It's very classical. I guess that makes sense of being neoclassical and all. And there's the intervention of the Sabine woman, which is kind of the story of how, so the Romans at one point needed wives, and so they went to this neighboring tribe group of people called the Sabines and took all of their women. And there's this ensuing war, and the women having kind of like their brothers on one side and their husbands on the other throw themselves in the middle, and this kind of just brings a peace between the two of them. And also there's this one guy in it who just looks literally like a Greek statue. It's so funny. I'm starting to get pretty tired. Are you? There's it's humongous. The coronation of Napoleon, which isn't actually like his coronation. It's actually him coronating his wife, Josephine, which was supposed to happen at the hand of the Pope, but Napoleon just kind of stood the Pope up, and you can sort of see him sitting unhappily in the background. But it's just this massive painting, and there are all these people who are supposed to be present there. It's like the attention to detail in it is just ridiculous. You have to really see it in person to understand just how enormous and like what's in it. Yeah, I don't really know. Of course, he didn't really stay in Napoleon's graces forever, because Napoleon kind of loses battles eventually and gets kicked out. So he paints a lot of portraits of people during the French Revolution, and one of the really famous ones is his Death of Marat. So Marat is the philosopher of the Revolution, and he's sort of got this terrible skin condition, so he spends a lot of time in the bath. Anyways, one day he gets assassinated, and so he gets commissioned to make this piece, and he puts Marat in the bath and paints him as the most Christ-like figure you can imagine. The posture and position that Marat are in are incredibly reminiscent of those of the Pieta of Mary mourning Jesus. And for good measure in the painting, David removes the skin blemishes, as well as having Marat making a letter basically giving money to the assassin as like charity, not as a bribe. It's sort of hard to understand, but like I can explain more later when I'm not quite so tired. One of his students Gross is his last name, paints Napoleon at the House of Jaffa, which is the scene of Napoleon touching the wounds of some infected at the sick house at Jaffa, and it's kind of bringing back this whole idea of Napoleon as kind of like a Jesus Christ figure, being willing to be among the sick. So there's this whole kind of heroic nature to these neoclassical works. There's this guy called Ong. In English, it would just look like Ingress. And he has this funny little painting called The Grand Odalisque. And it's this woman with her back turned to the viewer, but if you look closely at the painting, you can see that the woman is anatomically impossible, and I think apparently requires about 2 extra vertebrae to be in the position she's in. He also paints the Apotheosis of Homer, Homer being the Greek bard who supposedly introduced the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's an apotheosis of Washington, I think, in the White House, just pointing that out. Apotheosis being kind of becoming a god in your death. So like Homer is being crowned as a muse and everything. The same thing supposedly happened to Romulus. He just becomes this god called Quirinius at some point when he dies. And there's also some Rococo stuff. Rococo is this kind of light, flowery, it's very flighty and it's happy and it's fanciful. If you've ever seen The Swing by Fragonard, that made a short cameo in Frozen, by the way. There's some stuff by Giotto, notably the embarkation for Cythera, which is kind of this, it's a group of people and they're leaving a mainland and they're kind of going to this paradise of Cythera, and it's kind of like avoiding the troubles of the world and going off to your own, happiness. That's a very Rococo idea. It's not a particularly serious style. I mean, it must have taken serious work to make, but and they have this section dedicated to Northern European artists. So notably, Vermeer, the astronomer, is there, and it's just classic, very, very well made Vermeer stuff, if a bit small. And there's some stuff by Van Eyck. I don't remember what really, but he's the guy who made the Arnolfini wedding, which I think a lot of people now call the Arnolfini portrait because they think it might not be a wedding portrait after all. But yeah, I really like Van Eyck stuff, even though the faces are really pale and thin and it's kind of weirdly inhuman, but very interesting to look at. And I think there's some works by Bosch there. Bosch being the person who created the Garden of Earthly Delights, which is this 3-panel triptych, really trippy thing with lots of weird stuff. But yeah, that's like a tiny, minute portion of stuff that's in the Louvre. There's so much amazing stuff, and it's huge, and I'm really excited. But we really need to be getting our sleep if we're gonna enjoy it, alright? So, good night, alright?